My name is Miriam Blake, and I never thought the day would come when my own daughter would say I was too embarrassing for her wedding. I can still hear her words echo through my mind as if they were spoken just yesterday, sharp and unforgiving. It is a bitter irony I spent my entire life nurturing love and kindness, sowing seeds of humility and grace, only to be dismissed by the very blood that I believed would share in my legacy. I was born into simplicity, raised in a small, modest home that reeked of home-cooked meals, worn furniture, and the honest scent of hard work. Every wrinkle on my face, every silver hair bears the story of those long years of struggle and unwavering commitment to family. I poured my heart into every moment of motherhood, sacrificing my own dreams and desires to ensure that my daughter Lacey had every advantage in a world that prized beauty, success, and perfection above all else. Yet as she stepped into a world defined by gloss and pretense, our values diverged. The day of her wedding loomed on the horizon like an iridescent mirage, a symbol of the life she chose over the one I had always known. I had assumed that the years of love and maternal devotion would bind us, that the shared history of our humble beginnings would remind her of who we truly were. But the invitation to the celebration never came in the way I expected. Instead, I found myself at a crossroads, staring at a postcard bearing a request rather than an invitation. A request to send the heirloom necklace that had been passed down to me, the very symbol of our family's legacy. It began one chilly morning in early spring. I found myself sorting through old keepsakes in the attic, a routine that had long since become both a solace and a ritual. Among the faded photographs and brittle letters, my fingers brushed against the cool metal of an antique jewelry box. In it lay the necklace, a delicate chain adorned with a pendant that had once graced the neck of my mother. I held it, feeling the weight of history and the echoes of whispered stories about love loss and the sacrifices made in its name. As I ran my fingers along the intricate design, memories flooded in tender afternoons by the window, where I would listen to her recount tales of simpler times, of promises made under starlit skies and dreams nurtured in secret. That necklace was more than a piece of jewelry. It was the tangible thread binding generations of unyielding strength and quiet resistance. And now, when it was demanded as a token for a wedding I was not invited to, it felt like an unspoken declaration, a dismissal not only of my presence, but of the very essence of who I was. You might think that as I grew older, I would learn to forgive such wounds, to let bygones be bygones. But deep within, the sting of those words festers. They cut much deeper than any harsh remark could, because they strike at the core of a mother's identity. I always believed that a mother's love was unconditional, that no matter how far her child strayed, that bond would remain unbroken. Yet the relentless pursuit of perfection in this modern world left me on the outskirts of a celebration that was never meant for me, a celebration that had been sanitized by the measure of societal standards, where authenticity was traded for polished appearances. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. There is a lesson here in every tear, every quiet act of defiance. I am not here to wage a war of words, but to show that true strength is found in silent actions and the dignified holding onto what is rightfully yours. In that moment, the postcard I received was not just a slip of paper. It was an invitation to reclaim my honor without uttering a single angry syllable. I remember the exact texture of the paper as I unfolded it slowly in my cozy little kitchen, where so many of our shared stories had been told over cups of tea. The handwriting was elegant but cold, like a signature from someone who had long since decided that I no longer mattered. The request was simple: please send the necklace. There was no apology, no regret, just an order. I could almost hear the dismissive tone in the silence of those written words, a tone that said my presence was nothing more than an inconvenience, a relic of a past that no longer served the glamorous new narrative Lacey had embraced. That simple request was the catalyst for something stirring within me. For years, I had harbored the quiet pain of watching my daughter metamorphose into someone I hardly recognized, a woman who had traded the authenticity of our shared past for the facades of high society. I had often wondered if she even realized what she was discarding, if the price of success and elegance came at the cost of abandoning the very soul that nurtured her. The heirloom necklace now represented so much more than an object. It was a symbol of a heritage, a token of sacrifice, and a legacy of love that spanned generations. In that moment of introspection, I made a decision that would define the path I was to take in the months that followed. I would not be reduced to a mere memory, a faded portrait in the album of family history. I would not be the quiet, unspoken regret of a daughter too enthralled by her social image. No, I would reclaim the dignity that was rightfully mine, not with loud confrontation, but with the serene, calculated grace of someone who has seen both the light and darkness of life. I spent the rest of that day in a reflective haze. The old photographs of my youth, the letters from my late husband, and the soft murmur of memories intertwined with the present reality. I realized that every sacrifice I had made, every moment of tenderness, and every heartbreak had led me to this defining moment. It was time to let the world know that sometimes silence speaks the loudest, and that even an uninvited guest at a celebration can cast a long, resolute shadow. I slowly wound the necklace back into its velvet-lined box and set it on the sideboard, a silent promise to myself that soon the power of my legacy would be revealed in ways that no one could ignore. For I knew that the day of reckoning was not in the grand halls of a wedding, but in the quiet moments of truth that follow when masks fall away and the real story emerges from beneath the surface of polished lies. Looking out of my window as the afternoon light softened into a gentle glow, I understood that from this day forward the chapters of my life would no longer be dictated by the dismissive words of others. Instead, they would be written by the measured beats of a heart that had endured too much to be silenced. Even as the world around me celebrated superficial victories, I was preparing to carve out a legacy that honored every sacrifice, every unshed tear, and every quiet act of rebellion. The journey was just beginning. And as I took a deep, steady breath, I felt an unspoken assurance: this was the start of my redemption. A redemption not born of dramatic confrontations, but of gentle resistance and the unwavering power of memory. In the depths of my heart, I knew that one day those who had dismissed me would feel the quiet weight of truth settle upon them, and they would regret ever underestimating the strength that comes from a lifetime of enduring love and loss. The silence between Lacey and me used to be filled with the noise of life, the clatter of dishes from our tiny kitchen, the scratch of pencils during her homework, the soft rustle of bedtime stories read aloud. Now it was something entirely different. Sterile, empty. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruelest part. The unraveling of a relationship isn't a clean tear. It's a slow fraying thread by invisible thread. The first time I noticed it was the Thanksgiving 3 years ago. She arrived late, hair perfectly blown out, coat more expensive than my monthly pension. She hugged me politely, then spent the evening glued to her phone. I tried to show her a new photo of her late father. I had found one of the two of them dancing in the living room, both laughing. She looked at it for a second and said, "That's sweet, Mom," like it was a napkin sketch. Then she went back to scrolling. After that, the phone calls stopped coming so often. Our visits were scheduled brief, filtered through her assistant or her fiancé. I chalked it up to stress her new life, her job. You know how mothers always make excuses for their children. But deep down I knew Lacey had found a life she believed she deserved. A life that didn't include the worn-out comfort of a small-town mother who never quite figured out makeup or Instagram-worthy aesthetics. I'd raised her to be confident, but I hadn't raised her to be cruel. Yet here I was, watching her from the window of a small-town cafe, laughing with colleagues in crisp blazers, while I stirred my tea in the background, invisible like the wallpaper. She didn't even see me, or maybe she did, and chose not to wave. I walked home that day with a lump in my throat. Not sadness, not yet. Something worse. That quiet ache of realizing you've become a footnote in the life of the person you gave everything to. Later that evening, I opened the old tin box under my bed. Inside were pieces of her childhood, a drawing she made when she was 6 of the two of us holding hands labeled me and my hero. A lock of her hair from her first haircut, a newspaper clipping from when she won the regional science fair, and nestled among them a velvet pouch. The necklace. It had belonged to my mother before me and her mother before her. Not expensive, not flashy, but intricate, handmade. A fine gold chain with a small heart-shaped locket etched with curling vines, and the tiniest ruby set at the center. Inside the locket was a miniature photo of my grandmother, the woman who wore this necklace during the Great Depression, who passed it on to my mother when she left home to start her own family. Every woman in our line had worn this necklace on her wedding day, not because it was valuable, but because it was sacred. I always believed Lacey would wear it too. I had imagined pinning it around her neck the morning of her wedding, my hands trembling, both of us crying. I had saved it for her, protected it, and now she wanted it mailed in a bubble envelope. The day after I received her postcard, I called her, not to argue, just to hear her voice. She answered after 4 rings. "Hi, Mom." Her tone was clipped distracted. "Lacey," I said. "I got your message." "Great. Could you send it to the hotel by next Thursday? There's a stylist handling the accessories. You don't need to worry about it." There it was. You don't need to worry about it. A phrase that cut sharper than any knife. "Lacey," I said slowly, "do you really not want me there?" There was a pause. Just one beat. But I heard it. "It's complicated, Mom. You know how things are. With Dad gone and this is a very curated day. Carter's family is very formal." Formal. That was the word she chose. "I don't want anything to feel out of place," she added. I felt my breath catch. "You mean I would feel out of place?" More silence. Then, "Mom, please, let's not make this a thing. I just need the necklace." I hung up before I could cry. That night, I sat with the necklace in my lap, its chain curled in my palm like the last thread tethering me to something sacred. I remembered her words as a teenager when she was bullied in middle school. She came home in tears because the girls called her thrift store Lacey. I'd held her in my arms and I'd told her, "Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of where you come from. You are made of stronger stuff." And yet now here she was ashamed of me. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about what she was willing to discard to fit someone else's definition of perfection. She didn't understand that the necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a lineage. It was her grandmother's hands baking bread, her great-grandmother's lullabies in broken English, my own tears, the night I sewed her first recital dress. It was the unspoken promise that no matter how far you go, you don't erase where you came from. I set the necklace back in its velvet pouch, closed the tin, and slid it into the drawer. If she wanted to wear it on her wedding day, she would have to see me to get it. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because some things can't be mailed. Some things must be handed down face to face, heart to heart. And if she couldn't see that, then maybe she wasn't ready to carry that weight. I turned off the lamp, the room swallowed by quiet. I laid in bed, eyes wide open, and whispered to the dark. Not everything handed down can be worn like a prop. The days that followed were quieter than usual, and that's saying something because my life is already stitched together by quiet routines. Boiling water for tea. Folding clothes while the radio hums in the background. Rereading letters I'd meant to throw away but couldn't. But now everything felt suspended. Like I was living in a waiting room between what was and what would be. The wedding was only weeks away, and every hour that passed seemed to carry the echo of Lacey's voice. "You don't need to worry about it." I'd always told myself I was at peace with a simple life. I don't crave grandeur. I don't envy wealth. I've found meaning in hand-sewn quilts, in handwritten recipes, in the way silence falls perfectly between pages of a book. But there's something deeply disorienting about realizing that the person you raised sees your simplicity as shame. And so one gray morning, I walked to the back of the closet and pulled down the old cedar box. It was heavier than I remembered. Not because of its contents, but because of what they meant now. Inside were the heirloom pieces I'd spent my life preserving, fragile keepsakes that told the story of my family, not in words, but in thread, metal, wood, and glass. The necklace was nestled in a smaller velvet pouch, resting gently beside my grandmother's hairbrush and a yellowed envelope of love letters from the war. I laid the necklace on the table and stared at it. It's not the kind of jewelry you'd see in magazines. It doesn't sparkle like modern diamonds or gleam with polish. But it has a kind of intimacy to it, the way time carves meaning into ordinary things. The pendant was shaped like a heart, yes, but not the cartoon kind. It had an elongated curve with two vine-like branches wrapping gently around the edges, forming a subtle spiral at the bottom. In the center, set just beneath the locket hinge, was a tiny ruby, duller now than when I first saw it in my mother's hands, but still vibrant in a way that only age can give. Inside was a miniature photo, my mother on her wedding day, standing beside my grandmother in front of a wooden chapel. Both wore soft dresses sewn by hand. Both wore the same necklace. I never imagined it would become a weapon in this quiet war. Back when Lacey was little, she would sneak into my room and ask to see it. She'd call it the princess necklace and say she wanted to wear it when she married someone who'd love her forever and ever. I told her it wasn't just for show, it was for truth. You wear it when your heart is honest, I said once, kneeling in front of her with the locket open. It doesn't matter who sees it. It matters what it carries. She nodded, then eyes wide with belief. She was only 7. I don't know when that version of her disappeared. Maybe it was after the scholarship, when she left for college and came back dressing in ways that didn't match her laugh anymore. Maybe it was the job in the city where everything became branded, staged, approved. Or maybe it was always going to happen. Maybe I raised her so well she believed she didn't need me. But I held on to hope. Not the reckless kind that breaks your ribs, the quiet, cautious kind that keeps you from locking every door. Until she asked for the necklace and not for me. That night, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I opened my mother's old notebook, a hard-bound journal filled with half-finished recipes and soft pencil sketches of brooches she wanted to design. At the back, tucked into the binding, was a folded letter. It was dated 1964, addressed to me. I had read it only once before, the day after my mother died. I'd been too heartbroken to take in the words then, but now I read them again. To my Miriam, this necklace was never just jewelry. It carries our memory not just of the women who wore it, but of the choices they made. We are not wealthy, but we are not poor. Our currency is love, grit, and quiet pride. If you ever feel like giving this necklace to someone who doesn't understand that, wait. Wait until they remember who they are. And if they never do, then it was never meant to be theirs. I set the letter down, hand trembling slightly. It felt as if my mother had just spoken across time. Not loudly, just enough to steady me. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee, dressed in my best blouse, and walked to the post office. I carried 2 envelopes. One was for the wedding RSVP I'd never received. I returned it blank with no note. Let the silence speak for itself. The second was a card, a vintage one embossed with lilacs and lace, the kind I used to buy at the general store when Lacey was young. Inside, I wrote only one sentence. The necklace is not available for mailing. If you'd like to receive it properly, you know where to find me. No name, no signature, just the truth written in calm ink. I dropped both in the slot and walked back home, slow but steady, the wind curling gently at my coat. There was no rage in me, no bitterness, just resolve. Because if she wanted to claim a legacy she had spent years ignoring, she'd have to look me in the eyes. Not as a costume, not as a prop, but as her mother. 2 days after I mailed the card, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. And then silence again. I didn't need to check the voicemail to know who it was. There would be no voicemail, of course. Not from Lacey. That would have required more vulnerability than she could stomach. Instead, I waited, not with expectation, but with a strange sense of calm. Like watching storm clouds roll in after years of drought. I didn't want thunder, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore either. I spent that afternoon dusting the living room as I always did on Thursdays. I straightened the stack of old wedding albums, mine, my mother's, and even one from my grandmother's time, though that one had only 2 pictures left. One of the ceremony, one of the locket around her neck, always the necklace. It was then, as I ran my fingers along the fraying edge of a leather-bound album, that the front door creaked open. No knock, just the sound of high heels on wood floors, sharp and out of place in this house. "Mom." Her voice was tentative, not small, not apologetic, just cautious, like a person checking for traps. I didn't turn right away. I kept wiping the frame of the photograph I was holding, the one of her father holding her as a toddler, her little hands tangled in his collar. Then I said, "You're early. Wedding's not until Saturday, is it?" She stepped further inside. The air shifted just slightly. Perfume expensive and cold. Designer, no doubt. Something floral layered over something synthetic. A scent that said, "I'm not like where I came from." "I was in town for a fitting," she said. "Figured I'd stop by." I placed the photo back in its spot. "Fittings used to happen in this living room. Remember? Your junior prom. We safety pinned the hem together while you stood on that stool. You were furious about the shoes." Lacey didn't laugh. I finally turned to face her. She looked stunning. I'll never deny that. Her makeup was subtle. Her dress, sharp hair pulled into a high twist. Everything about her said perfection. Curated elegance. Picture-ready poise. Except her eyes. They were glassy. "You got my card," I said. She nodded. "Mom, it's just... people are expecting me to wear it. Carter's family knows it's a tradition." I leaned against the bookshelf. "And traditions matter. When they serve a purpose." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "I didn't mean to make you feel excluded," she said finally, as if the words had been rehearsed. I tilted my head. "You didn't make me feel excluded, Lacey. You excluded me." That hung in the air like smoke. She looked away. "I just thought it'd be easier," she mumbled. "Easier than what?" "Than dealing with the comments. Carter's parents are very formal, very, they have expectations. And you thought I'd embarrass you?" My voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to." She didn't deny it. That hurt more than I expected. I looked at her. Really looked. And saw a woman who had shaped herself to fit someone else's mold. She had filed down every rough edge, repainted every memory, sanded away the softness that had once made her glow. She wasn't a daughter anymore. She was a product. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "Good," I replied, "because I'm not interested in fighting." She stood there, shifting weight from one foot to the other, unsure of what to do with her hands. That was the girl I remembered, nervous, uncertain, human. Then her eyes drifted toward the jewelry box sitting on the corner table. I saw her gaze linger. Not on me, on it. "The necklace. That's it?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's not the most beautiful thing in this room," I said. Her eyes snapped to mine. I stepped forward, picked up the box, and opened it slowly. The necklace shimmered in the afternoon light. Not with opulence, but with memory. "You know what this is?" I said. She nodded again. "Then you know what it isn't. It's not a trophy, not a costume piece, and not something you earn by discarding the people who carried it before you." She said nothing. "I wore this on my wedding day. Your grandmother wore it on hers. And your great-grandmother before that? Not because it matched a theme or pleased a guest list, but because it reminded us of who we were, where we came from, who stood behind us." Lacey's eyes brimmed. She blinked fast. "You don't get to wear this," I continued, "until you understand that." I closed the box and placed it back on the table. She opened her mouth to argue, to beg, I don't know, but I raised a hand gently. "Come back when you're ready," I said. Not to wear it, to carry it. Then I turned and walked back into the kitchen where the kettle had just started to hiss. She didn't follow. A minute later, the door opened again, then closed, and I was alone. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel dismissed. I felt like the woman my grandmother always hoped I would be. And for once, the silence didn't ache. It rang. It echoed. It stood. The day of the wedding arrived, dressed in gold sunlight spilling across sidewalks, church bells ringing somewhere in the distance, and the kind of breeze that carries laughter from car windows and clinking glasses from brunch patios. I woke early not because I was invited, but because my body still remembers how it feels to prepare for someone else's big day. For years, I'd woken before dawn to steam dresses, bake muffins, sew ribbons, and make other people feel seen. This morning, there was no one to serve. But the habit lingered. I made tea dressed with care, not extravagantly, just intentionally. A soft navy dress I hadn't worn in years, the one with the tiny pearl buttons and long sleeves. Stockings, my best shoes polished. And of course, the necklace. It clicked shut around my neck with a satisfying finality. Not in spite, not in revenge, but in remembrance. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I saw my mother's eyes looking back at me. Not the color, the clarity, the quiet, steady strength that doesn't need a stage to be seen. I didn't go to the wedding. That was never part of my plan. Instead, I went to the cemetery. I walked slowly, each step measured, careful not to trip on the uneven stone path. My husband's grave was tucked beneath a gnarled maple tree, its branches now budding with early spring green. I stood there, hands clasped in front of me, the necklace warm against my collarbone. "I suppose she looks beautiful," I said aloud, though there was no one around. Hair pinned up, lips red, smiling for 100 pictures. A breeze brushed my cheek like a nod. I crouched and laid a small bouquet of daisies, his favorite. We used to pick them on roadside walks, pretending we were still teenagers, even when our backs ached and our hands shook. "I didn't give it to her," I said softly. "I couldn't." The maple leaves rustled overhead, whispering secrets only the dead understand. "I hope you'd agree," I added. Then I sat down on the bench nearby, closed my eyes, and just existed. I didn't check my watch. I didn't need to, because across town I knew exactly what was unfolding. The guests arriving at the venue, a renovated vineyard estate, all glass and stone and perfection. The string quartet playing canon in D. The photographer capturing curated moments while assistants adjusted veils and lighting. And Lacey walking down the aisle, radiant and precise, but not complete. I imagined the looks Carter's mother whispering to his aunt, wondering aloud why the bride wasn't wearing the family necklace. After all, hadn't she mentioned it over brunch weeks ago? Such a lovely tradition, such history. And Lacey caught between the pressure of 1,000 eyes and the absence of something deeper. A gap that lipstick couldn't fill. A silence she couldn't stage manage. I don't know if she looked for me. I doubt it. But I do know that people notice when something's missing. Especially something that's meant to be there. A legacy doesn't scream. It leaves a quiet imprint. A shadow where warmth should have been. At noon, I returned home and made myself lunch. Tomato soup. Buttered toast. Simple and sacred. I sat in the window seat, sun warming my feet, book in my lap. The necklace stayed on. Later that evening, I received a text. No photos. No hearts. Just, "Why would you do that?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I replied, "You'll understand when you're a mother." She didn't answer. Not that night. Not the next day. But I could feel the silence between us shifting. This time it wasn't cold. It wasn't dismissive. It was thoughtful, heavy, like a pause before a question. The next morning, I received another message. Longer, still formal but quieter around the edges. People noticed. Carter's mom asked about the necklace. I told her it was delayed in the mail. She seemed disappointed. She asked if I knew the story behind it. I didn't know what to say. I didn't reply. Not immediately. Instead, I opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched in years, and began writing the full story of the necklace. Not just facts, but feelings. How my grandmother wore it during the war. How my mother clutched it when I was born. How I wore it the day I buried her. Page after page I wrote, not to guilt Lacey, but to give her a map back home. Because someday, maybe in months, maybe in years, she may look in the mirror and not recognize herself. And when that happens, she'll need a story to remember who she was, before the edits, before the expectations. And I'll be ready, but not yet, because for now the necklace stays with me, and she must learn what it means to earn it, not with appearances, but with presence. Not with polish, but with memory. Not with perfection, but with truth. The wedding came and went like a passing storm. I didn't hear much about it at first. Just scattered bits of news from neighbors and an old friend at the florist's shop. Apparently, it was a beautiful event. The weather had held. The flowers were exquisite. Lacey's dress was breathtaking, said one woman as she handed me my change at the market, not realizing I hadn't been invited. But they all mentioned the same thing in quiet, tiptoed tones. She wasn't wearing the necklace. It hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. I never explained. I didn't need to. There's a kind of power in letting people fill in the blanks themselves. Sometimes what they imagine is far more truthful than anything you could say aloud. A week passed before I opened the front door to find a courier envelope on my porch. It wasn't from Lacey. No return address. Just a name I recognized from her fiancé's family, Carter's cousin Emily, a woman I'd only met once briefly years ago at a brunch. I was clearly not meant to attend. Inside the envelope was a letter, neatly typed. Dear Miriam, I wanted to reach out to you personally after the wedding. I hope this isn't an intrusion. I just wanted to say, I noticed. I noticed the empty space where the necklace should have been. I noticed how tense Lacey became every time someone asked about it. And I noticed how Carter's mother looked genuinely disappointed, not in Lacey exactly, but in the loss of something that should have carried more weight than any designer gown. After the reception, I overheard Lacey say to a friend, "It's just a necklace." And I thought, no, it isn't. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that some of us did notice, and some of us understood. With respect, Emily. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it neatly, tucked it between the pages of my grandmother's old Bible, and let it rest there. Because the thing about validation is when it comes from unexpected corners, it lands deeper. Not because you need it, but because it tells you the truth can travel further than you ever intended. That afternoon, I made a decision. Not a grand one. Not a dramatic gesture. Just a quiet pivot. I pulled out my sewing kit, the old one with the faded strawberries on the lid, and began to repair the hem of an old dress. Not for Lacey. For a neighbor's granddaughter who was graduating next month. The dress had belonged to the girl's mother, and she wanted to wear it just the way it was. Something about that moved me. As I worked, my mind drifted to the idea of lineage, not just in blood, but in memory, in meaning, in the objects we choose to protect. Lacey had not yet come to understand that, but perhaps one day she would. I didn't harbor bitterness. Bitterness is loud, toxic, desperate. What I felt was something quieter, like the sound of a drawer closing gently. It's not rage. It's release. A few evenings later, I found myself flipping through our family photo albums again. I landed on one from Lacey's 7th birthday, the year she begged to wear the necklace for the first time. In the photo, she's holding a paper crown, eyes wide, cheeks stained with frosting. And around her neck, oversized and too long, hangs the heirloom. I had let her wear it that day just for a few minutes. I remember fastening it and whispering in her ear, "One day this will be yours if you carry it with care." I wonder now if she remembers that moment, or if it's been buried beneath years of filters, brunches, staged holiday cards, and curated smiles. I placed the photo on my desk, and beside it I wrote a letter. Dear Lacey, there are things you can borrow and things you must earn. The necklace is not a punishment withheld, nor a prize awarded. It is a memory, one that must be carried with tenderness and truth. I didn't give it to you because you didn't want me. You only wanted what I carried. But what I carry isn't just gold and rubies. It's stories, and silence, and sacrifice. It's the kind of love that asks nothing until it's dismissed. Then it asks everything. One day you may understand. I hope that day comes with softness, not regret. Love. Mom, I didn't send the letter. Not yet. I placed it with the necklace tucked safely inside the jewelry box and wrapped the box in a soft linen cloth, the same one my mother used when she passed it down to me. And then I waited. Not for her, but for time. Because some truths don't need confrontation. They need space. They need silence. They need to grow like roots, unseen, steady, inevitable. It was nearly a month before I heard from Lacey again. This time it wasn't a text. It wasn't a call. It was a visit unannounced, unplanned, and judging by the way she stood at the door with her hands clasped tightly around her phone, unprepared. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to see a solicitor or the neighbor boy asking to mow the lawn. But it was her. She looked less perfect than usual. No polished updo, no designer coat. Just a simple sweater jeans and her hair tied back like she used to wear it in high school. Her face was bare, not just of makeup, but of armor. I stepped aside. She entered silently and stood in the living room like someone visiting a museum of their childhood. Her eyes scanned the framed photos, the worn couch, the half-knitted scarf on the armrest. She looked like a woman both searching and avoiding something at once. "I was near town," she said, "and I didn't want to just text." I nodded and gestured toward the kitchen. "Tea." She nodded back as if relieved that we could do something ordinary together. Something without stakes. As I boiled water, she wandered toward the window and stared out at the overgrown hydrangeas. "I used to love those," she said quietly. "Remember when I tried to pick all the blue ones because I thought they were magic?" I smiled faintly. "You cried when they wilted in the vase the next day. You told me even magic needs roots." She said more to herself than to me. We sat down at the kitchen table, two mismatched mugs between us. Mine was chipped, hers still warm from the pour. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the necklace." I waited. "I didn't understand it," she continued. "Not really. I thought it was just tradition. Just something old to wear. I thought it was about how it looked in pictures." Her hands curled around the mug knuckles tight. "But then during the reception, everyone kept asking about it. Aunt Cecile, Carter's grandmother, even some of his co-workers who had heard about it during the engagement party." I raised an eyebrow. "You spoke about it." She gave a sheepish nod. "I did. I made it sound like it was already mine, like it was something I just inherited by default. And when it wasn't there, it felt like something was missing." I stayed quiet. "Carter asked about it too," she said after a moment. "He said his mother looked disappointed. Not because of the necklace, but because it meant something, and we made it seem like it didn't." She finally looked at me. Really looked. "You were right, not to give it to me." That caught me off guard. The admission hung in the air like dust caught in sunlight. "I wasn't ready to carry it," she said softer now. "I don't think I even knew how. I just wanted it to match my dress. I didn't think about what it meant to match my story." I sipped my tea, steadying the part of me that wanted to cry and hold her and say, "It's okay." Because it wasn't okay. Not yet. "I don't know how I became someone who was ashamed of where she came from," she whispered. "But I think maybe I did. Maybe I still am a little." I reached across the table and placed my hand on hers. Her grip tightened like a child in a thunderstorm. "It's not shameful to lose your way," I said. "It's only shameful if you never find your way back." She blinked hard. "Do you want to know the story behind the necklace?" I asked gently. She nodded. I walked into the hallway and returned with the velvet box, not to give it, but to open it between us. I placed it on the table and unfolded the linen wrap. There it was, glimmering softly in the afternoon light. I opened the clasp and turned it in my hand. "This pendant," I said, "was made by your great-great-grandfather during the war. He carved it from a piece of scrap metal he'd hidden in his boot for 3 years. When he came home, he set the ruby using a nail and a candle. It was meant for your great-grandmother's wedding, a promise that even after all the horror, love was still worth something." Lacey stared breath shallow. "Every woman in our family wore this on her wedding day, but only when the moment called for truth, not performance. Your great-grandmother wore it barefoot in a barn. My mother wore it in a borrowed dress. I wore it when I was 5 months pregnant and terrified." I looked up. "And none of us wore it for the photos." Lacey's eyes were full now. Not dramatic tears, quiet ones. The kind that sting more because they don't ask for attention. "I want to earn it," she said. I studied her for a moment, then closed the box. "You will," I said, "but not today." She nodded and for once didn't push. She stayed for dinner. We cooked together just like old times. She peeled potatoes while I grilled chicken, and at one point we laughed so hard at a memory that I had to sit down. It was like finding a long-lost radio station again, static giving way to song. After dinner, she left quietly. No promises, no sudden reconciliations, just a hug that lingered a second longer than usual. And when the door closed behind her, I looked at the necklace again. Still here, still waiting. But this time, it didn't feel like guarding a treasure. It felt like tending to a seed. 2 weeks passed. No texts. No calls. But I didn't feel abandoned this time. I felt space. And oddly, space felt like progress. Sometimes people need silence to hear themselves clearly. Then on a quiet Sunday morning, I heard a knock. Not the hesitant knock of guilt. Not the tapping fingers of obligation. But a steady, respectful knock. When I opened the door, I saw her. Lacey holding a small notebook in one hand, a box in the other. She wore no makeup again. Her hair was pulled into a simple braid down her back. She looked for the first time in years like the little girl who used to climb into my bed on stormy nights with her stuffed rabbit and whisper, "Mom, I brought my flashlight." "Just in case." "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside wordlessly. We sat at the table. She placed the box down. Then, the notebook. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. "And writing. I hope you don't mind. It's kind of like a journal, but also a confession." I stayed quiet. Let her speak. I started writing everything I remembered about growing up here. Not the big events. Just moments. Like the way you used to cut sandwiches into triangles and how you always smelled like cinnamon in winter. The time I fell off my bike and you didn't run to me, you waited until I got up and walked to you, even though I was bleeding. I thought you didn't care, but now I know it was strength you were giving me. Her hands shook as she opened the notebook and turned it toward me. On the first page was written, "What she carried." Beneath it, in smaller handwriting, "Memories. I forgot to thank you for." I looked up and she was already crying. "I don't want the necklace," she said through tears. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I think I need to carry you first. In here." She tapped the notebook. "Not around my neck. Not until I've earned it." I reached out, took her hand. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." And then, as if from nowhere, that old flood of mother love returned. Not the protective kind. The forgiving kind. The kind that doesn't say "I told you so," but says, "You made it back." We spent the afternoon reading her journal together. Some entries made us laugh, like the one about her sneaking powdered sugar and trying to cook for her imaginary tea parties. Some made us both weep, especially the entry titled, "The Night I Heard You Cry in the Kitchen." She had been 10. I never knew she'd heard. Later, she opened the box she'd brought with her. Inside were old photos, ones I hadn't seen in years. Us at the state fair, her in my wedding shoes, me braiding her hair with daisies. One photo was bent and stained, but precious. Me holding her as a baby wearing the necklace, its pendant resting against her soft cheek. "I want to remember," she said, "not just the shiny parts, the hard parts too. The parts where you were invisible, and I didn't even notice." And for once, there was no need to respond. Her presence was enough. She stayed for dinner again. Helped me with the dishes. We didn't talk much that night. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some healing happens in silence. Before she left, she asked to see the necklace once more. I brought it out. She didn't touch it, just looked. "Someday," she whispered, "I hope I'm worthy of it." "You already are," I said. "But worthiness isn't about wearing it. It's about knowing what it holds." And then I did something I hadn't planned. I removed the locket from its chain, gently opened it, and took out the tiny photo of my mother. I replaced it with a small square I had folded into my pocket earlier, the picture of me holding baby Lacey with the necklace against her cheek. Then I closed it and handed her the locket. Just the locket, not the chain. "Carry it in your pocket for a while," I said. "Feel it move with you. Let it knock against your bones a bit. When you're ready to wear it, you'll know." She took it with both hands, carefully, reverently, and then she left, not as a woman with something to prove, but as a daughter finding her way back. Lacey didn't return the next day, or the day after, but she didn't need to. Something had shifted, not just between us, within her, and I could feel it. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sweeping declarations, no viral apologies, no posts or pictures. Just small things. A week after her visit, I received a letter. Yes, a real letter. Ink on paper. In her handwriting, a slanted, elegant script I hadn't seen since she filled out college applications at our kitchen table. Inside, there were 5 pages folded neatly with a pressed violet tucked between them. My mother used to press violets in books, so did I. And once Lacey had copied me, laying a whole garden's worth between the pages of Charlotte's Web. In the letter she wrote, "Mom, I've started telling Carter more about where I came from. The real version. The version with chipped teacups and Sunday dinners and the time you stayed up all night sewing my Halloween costume when I changed my mind the night before. I think he's finally starting to understand who I really am, not just who I curated myself to be. Yesterday I told his mother about the necklace. The real story. I thought she might disapprove, but she cried. Said she wished she had something like that from her own mother. Said Carter was lucky. I've been carrying the locket in my coat pocket. It clinks against my keys when I walk. At first it annoyed me. Now it reminds me. It's strange how something so small can feel heavier than everything else you own. There's a new kind of silence between us. Mom, not the awkward kind, the sacred kind. The kind that holds forgiveness inside it. I hope you feel it too. Love, Lacey." I read it twice. Then again. And then I placed the letter in the same cedar box that had held the necklace for decades. Beside the velvet pouch. Beside the black and white photos. Beside the stories only we knew. That afternoon, I walked to the florist's shop, the same one that did the centerpieces for her wedding. The clerk, a sweet girl with wide eyes and chipped purple nail polish, looked up and smiled. "Miss Blake," she said, "those hydrangeas bloomed like magic this year. I ordered a bouquet of violets. Just violets." And when I returned home, I placed them in a mason jar beside Lacey's letter. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Emily Carter's cousin, the one who had written to me. She sounded warm, nervous, respectful. "I hope this isn't too forward," she said, "but would you be willing to share the story of the necklace? Like all of it. Lacey mentioned you were a beautiful writer. I'd love to include it in our local women's journal. We're doing a piece on heirlooms, but really it's about legacy, about what gets passed on that isn't just jewelry." I hesitated. Not because I was unsure, but because I had always kept our story close, private. Then I said yes. I'd like that. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just watching life from the edge of a photograph. I was part of the frame again. Over the next few days, I wrote everything. Not just the story of the necklace, but the story of silence. The story of invisible labor. Of birthday cakes baked at 2 a.m. Of sacrifices made without receipts. Of wounds stitched quietly with no one watching. I wrote about my mother. And hers. And mine. And Lacey. And how sometimes the most powerful inheritance we give isn't an object. It's the strength to carry what others discarded. The article came out a month later, titled, "More Than Gold. A Mother's Inheritance." The editor sent me 2 copies. I kept one. I mailed the other to Lacey with no note. Just the locket tucked gently in the crease. No chain. Just the heart. A week later, I received a photo. Lacey standing in her garden. Hair braided. Hands in the dirt. Wearing the locket around her neck hung on a simple thread of twine. No makeup. No caption. Just her face. Full open, real. That was the first time I cried. Not out of grief. Out of arrival. She had come home, and I hadn't needed to chase her. She found her way back step by quiet step. The locket had done its job. It had reminded her who she was, who we were. And that love, when it is real, does not beg to be seen. It simply waits. The magazine article reached more people than I expected. I thought it would live quietly in a corner of a small-town women's journal, sandwiched between recipes and announcements for knitting circles. But something about it resonated. Within a week, I received over 24 letters. Handwritten. Typed. Some even from women I didn't know. One said, "I read your story 3 times. Then I called my mother for the first time in 7 years." Another wrote, "I never had a necklace, but I did have a cedar box and a mother who sacrificed everything. Thank you for reminding me what that means." Some included old photos. A grandmother at her wedding. A family heirloom, a brooch, a scarf, a quilt, square, a rosary. Ordinary things made sacred by the hands that held them. I hadn't expected this. But more than that, I hadn't expected what came next. Lacey invited me to dinner, not just to eat. To her home, her real home. Not the gallery receptions or country clubs or Mother's Day brunch at trendy downtown cafes. Her actual home where she lived with Carter. where her laundry piled up sometimes and the dishwasher didn't always get emptied, and there was dust on the windowsills. Nothing fancy, she'd said over the phone. Just us. And that's exactly what it was. When I arrived, the porch light was already on. She opened the door before I knocked, wearing an apron, hair slightly frizzed from the heat of the oven. I had never seen her look more beautiful. "Come in," she smiled. "Dinner's just about done." The smell of roasted vegetables filled the space. I stepped into a house that wasn't trying to impress anyone, and for the first time I saw my daughter's life without filters. There were mismatched picture frames on the wall, a small plant that looked like it was trying its best to survive, and a basket of laundry on the couch. In the center of the table sat a small velvet box, the necklace box, but not mine, a new one. She saw me looking and said, "It's not what you think." She motioned for me to sit, then brought over 2 plates chicken pot pie, golden and bubbling. The edges were a little burnt. Perfect. When we were both seated, she reached for the velvet box, opened it, and turned it toward me. Inside was a delicate chain with a small carved wooden heart. No ruby, no gold. Just wood, smooth, warm, simple. "I made this," she said. "Well, Carter helped. His grandfather used to do carpentry. We wanted to make something that didn't copy yours, but honored it." I picked it up carefully. It was beautiful, not because of craftsmanship, but because of meaning. The grain of the wood swirled like memory. It felt warm in my hands. "We want to start something new," she said. "When we have children, if we're lucky, I want to give them something that reminds them of where they came from. And I don't want it to be about photos or status or matching a dress. I want it to be about story." I looked at her stunned. She continued, "I think I confused inheritance with appearance. I thought legacy was something shiny you wore on the outside. But now I understand it's what presses against your heart." I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have words. Because there were too many. After dinner, we sat in the living room. She brought out the notebook again, the one titled What She Carried. She'd added more pages. "Would you read one?" she asked. I opened to a dog-eared section. My eyes skimmed a memory. "You taught me to sew on a rainy Saturday. I wanted to make a blanket for my doll. It came out crooked." I cried. "You told me it was perfect. I didn't understand then. Now I do. You weren't talking about the stitches. You were talking about me." I closed the book gently, placed my hand over hers. "You're not the same woman who stood in my doorway that day," I said softly. She looked down, almost ashamed. But I lifted her chin. "You're better." She smiled. A real smile. The one she used to wear at age 10, when she built forts from sheets, and begged me to bring cookies inside. As the evening ended, I stood to leave. She walked me to the door. Before I stepped outside, she pressed something into my hand, a folded piece of paper. "It's for the box," she said. When I got home, I placed it beside the necklace and unfolded it. It was a simple line written in her now familiar slant. "A legacy is not what we take from our mothers. It's what we are finally willing to carry." The wooden pendant sat beside my bed, now nestled in a small dish of rings and reading glasses. I hadn't meant to keep it there, but that's where it ended up, and somehow it felt right. Like a small breathing thing beside me as I drifted off each night. One morning, I awoke to find sunlight catching on its smooth edge. I picked it up, held it between my fingers, and whispered, "She gets it now." And for the first time in years, I felt my mother close again, not in the past, but in the present, watching, as another daughter stepped into the lineage she never fully realized she belonged to. Later that week, I was invited to something that just a year ago I never would have imagined. A storytelling event at Lacey's community center. She had been volunteering, nothing flashy, just once a month, reading to elderly residents, and organizing small family heritage nights. She had told me on the phone that it was cathartic, but I knew what it really was. It was her way of giving back what she'd almost lost. She asked me to come as a guest speaker, said they were doing a mothers and daughters through time theme, and that she wanted me to tell our family story, not the curated one, the real one. I laughed when she asked, "Are you sure? I might embarrass you." There was a pause. Then, "That's exactly why I want you there." So I went, "I wore the necklace. The real one." And this time, it wasn't hidden beneath a scarf or reserved for silent defiance. It gleamed openly against a dark green blouse I had saved for special occasions. The center was humble beige walls, folding chairs, a refreshment table covered in sugar cookies, and lukewarm tea. But the room pulsed with warmth. Children fidgeted in their seats. Grandmothers whispered old recipes. The scent of lemon-scented cleaner mixed with perfume and paper. Lacey introduced me with trembling hands and a nervous laugh. Her voice cracked when she said, "This is my mother Miriam. And this necklace she's wearing has lived a longer, richer life than either of us." I took the microphone slowly, palms dry. Then I spoke. I told them about my grandmother barefoot in a borrowed wedding dress, about my mother clutching the necklace the day I was born, about the tears I shed in silence when I realized I was being excluded from my own daughter's wedding. I told them about dignity, about forgiveness that isn't loud but deliberate, about the power of not being invited and still showing up in spirit. There wasn't a sound in the room by the time I finished. Just a few wet sniffs. One woman stood and clapped gently. Then another. Then everyone. When I sat down, Lacey leaned in and whispered, "I hope I make you proud." I squeezed her hand. "You already have." After the event, a young woman approached me, no more than 25, maybe a new mother herself. She said, "You made me call my mom in my head. I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. I think it's time I stopped being afraid of who I used to be." And just like that, I realized something. This wasn't just about Lacey anymore. This was bigger. This was about every woman who had ever felt she wasn't enough for her child, and every child who had ever tried to outrun where they came from, and every necklace, literal or not, passed down, misplaced, or nearly forgotten. Back at home, I removed the necklace and placed it in its box once more. But this time, I added something new. A small slip of paper folded into quarters. It read, "If you are holding this now, it means you've learned the difference between inheritance and identity. Wear it only when your heart is full. And if it ever begins to slip away again, take it off. Remember who you are before you remember who they want you to be." I sealed it carefully, because the necklace was never just about Lacey. It was about every woman who would come after her. It was early spring again when I received the news. Lacey was expecting. She didn't call me right away. I heard about it first through a neighbor, not in gossip, but in that gentle roundabout way small towns pass on truth. She looked radiant at the doctor's office, Mrs. Pennington told me as she bagged my groceries. "Same eyes as you know, that wide-open kind. The kind that watches before it judges." Later that day, my phone rang. "Lacey." This time, I answered on the first ring. "Mom," she began. "I already know," I smiled. She exhaled. "I was nervous to tell you. Isn't that silly?" "Of course it is," I replied. "But fear and love, they often ride the same line." There was a pause. Then she said, "I want you to help me write her story." I sat down at the kitchen table, hand tightening on the receiver. "Her," Lacey laughed. "Yes, it's a girl. And I want her to know everything. All the pieces. The good, the hard, the roots. I want her to grow up with it not as a burden, but as a guide." "Then we'll begin," I said softly with the truth. Over the following weeks, we met every Sunday afternoon. Lacey would bring a notebook sometimes, with Carter, sometimes alone. We sat at the same table where she once learned to read, where I mended hems and cut coupons. But this time, we crafted something different. A map. We started with names, dates, photographs, recipes. But soon, the notebook turned into more than a keepsake. It became a living document, pages filled with little legends. How my mother once chased a fox away from our chickens with a rolling pin. How Lacey once made me cry when she said she wished she had a better mom, and how she later hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. One Sunday, she came with a question. "Do you think I should give her the necklace?" I blinked. "She's not born yet." "I know, but I want her to grow up seeing it, knowing it." I thought for a long moment. "Then show her how you carry it first," I said. "Not on your neck, in your choices." Lacey nodded. "She'll ask about it one day. I want to have the right story to tell." And so she did. Each time she came over, she added a new page to the notebook. She titled it, "Before You Were Born, We Remembered." One page read, Your great-grandmother wore this necklace with a dress sewn from her curtains. She said the thread didn't match, but her heart did. Another said, your grandmother, that's me, didn't wear it to my wedding because I wasn't invited. But I wore it the day I forgave. That last one made me close the book and press it to my chest. Lacey didn't just remember, she honored. And when the baby came, a beautiful, solemn-eyed girl with dark curls and her father's dimple, Lacey called me from the hospital and said, her name is Ruby. My heart stopped. After the stone. No, she whispered. After the story. A week later, I held Ruby for the first time. She was swaddled in a blanket I had knit long ago just in case. Her tiny hands curled and uncurled as I hummed the same lullaby my mother once sang to me. As I looked down at her, the necklace glimmered faintly in its box nearby untouched waiting. And for the first time in my life, I felt not like a mother who had been left behind, but like a woman who had built something that endured. Legacy, I realized, isn't what you pass down. It's what returns. And as Ruby blinked up at me, eyes wide with the light of generations, I whispered a promise into her soft crown of hair. You don't have to earn it. You just have to remember. Time moved differently after Ruby was born. Everything slowed, not in that dragging, lifeless way, but in a rich, syrupy rhythm. Afternoons lingered. Mornings came gentler. Even the ticking of my old mantel clock seemed to soften. And somehow, in the quiet, I found myself remembering things I didn't even know I'd forgotten. Lacey visited every week now, sometimes twice. She'd bring Ruby in her arms, a blanket over one shoulder, a diaper bag swinging from the other. She had become a different kind of beautiful, the kind that doesn't come from skin or hair or clothes, but from being tethered to something real. She stopped wearing the necklace. The wooden one, too. I don't need to, she told me once as we sat in the garden while Ruby napped. It's already in my voice, in how I hold her, in how I answer the hard questions. That afternoon, she read me a new page she'd added to the legacy journal. Your mom once thought love had to be performed, that if it didn't shine, it wasn't real. But your grandmother taught her otherwise. She taught her that love doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a place to land. That line stayed with me, especially when I was alone, especially when I stood in front of my mirror and caught the soft glint of my mother's locket still waiting. I hadn't worn it since the event at the community center. Something about letting it rest felt right, as though its work for now was done. But one night I dreamed I was sitting at a dinner table. 4 women surrounded me, my grandmother, my mother Lacey, and Ruby, grown and radiant. We were all laughing, not talking, laughing. The kind of laughter that tastes like fresh bread and wind in your hair. And in the dream, each of us wore the necklace, though it had changed. On every neck it looked a little different. A different chain, a different stone, a different story carved into its shape. I awoke with tears in my eyes and a warmth in my chest. That morning, I made a choice. I wrote a letter, not to Lacey, to Ruby. Dear Ruby, by the time you read this, you may already know the story. Or you may only know the outline, the necklace, the wedding, the silence. But I want you to hear it from me just once. I made mistakes. So did your mother. So did her mother before her. But each of us tried. We tried to hold on to something we couldn't name, something fragile but fierce. The thread between generations that says, I was here, and I loved you. The necklace is yours when you're ready. But know this. Its value isn't in the metal or the ruby. It's in the choices you make when no one is watching. It's in how you speak to someone who cannot repay you. It's in how you forgive, even when it still aches. One day you'll stand in front of your own daughter, or maybe a stranger, or maybe only a mirror, and you'll wonder if you've done enough. Let this letter be your answer. If you've loved with quiet strength, then yes, you've done more than enough. With all my heart, Grandma Miriam. I folded the letter and placed it in a new envelope, crisp ivory sealed with wax. I tucked it into the cedar box beneath the locket and placed the wooden pendant beside it. 2 tokens, 2 stories, 2 kinds of inheritance. Later that evening, I told Lacey about the dream. She held my hand and said, maybe one day Ruby will write her own version. Maybe she'll make a necklace out of thread or words or paint. Maybe she'll carry us in a way we can't yet imagine. I smiled. Then our work is done, She kissed my cheek. And in the glow of the setting sun, with Ruby babbling softly in her cradle, I felt the weight of a life fully lived. Not perfect, but true. Because in the end, we all leave something behind. Not just heirlooms, not just stories, but echoes. And if we're lucky, the echo becomes a voice. And the voice says, "You were never forgotten. You were always the root." The seasons changed again. Ruby turned 1. The celebration was small, just close friends, a few relatives, and a backyard blooming with early wildflowers. Lacey made the cake herself, slightly lopsided but glowing with love. Carter set up a string of soft lights in the trees, and I arrived with a basket of books from my own childhood, blueberries for Sal Goodnight, Moon Charlotte's Web. Ruby toddled around in white socks, giggling as she chased a red balloon across the grass. I watched from the porch swing, my hands folded over my lap, my eyes not missing a thing. At one point, she tripped and fell forward, landing softly on her palms. Her face scrunched, not in pain but in indecision. That split second when a child decides whether to cry. She looked up at Lacey, who paused just long enough to let Ruby figure it out herself. Then Ruby stood, wobbled, and kept walking. I smiled. Lacey caught my eye and mouthed, "She's strong." I nodded. "She's homegrown." As the evening settled and the sun dipped behind the hills, Lacey brought me a slice of cake and sat beside me on the swing. She didn't get any gifts from Carter's side of the family with history, she said. "It's all new things. Beautiful, yes, but clean slates. No fingerprints." "New isn't bad," I replied, "but fingerprints remind us we were held before we even knew it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Can I bring the necklace home?" I looked at her. Really looked. Gone was the woman performing for cameras, for reputations, for a curated version of perfection. In her place was someone who had unlearned the noise and returned to signal. "Why now?" I asked gently. She didn't hesitate. "Because Ruby's going to start asking questions soon. And I want to be the one to answer them with truth. Not just stories, symbols too." That night, after the guests had left, and Ruby had fallen asleep on her mother's chest, I returned home and retrieved the cedar box one last time. I placed it in a linen tote along with the letter I had written to Ruby, the wooden pendant, and a single daisy from my garden. And the next morning, I handed it to Lacey. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She held it the way one holds something both weightless and monumental, as if it contained not just objects, but memory, forgiveness, and everything in between. "I'll protect it," she said. "You'll live it," I corrected. She kissed my forehead and left. I stood in the doorway long after the car disappeared, the morning breeze brushing my arms, the light pooling across the floor. The necklace was gone. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I'd given it away. I felt like I'd passed it forward. That night, I wrote a final entry in my own journal. I used to think legacy was what we left behind. But now I know it's what walks ahead of us, carrying echoes of who we were, softened by who they choose to become. And if love is carried well, then perhaps one day when Ruby places the necklace around her own daughter's neck, she'll say, not, "This is from Grandma Miriam, but this is from a long line of women who never gave up on each other." And that will be enough. I never imagined the end of a story could feel like the beginning of something else. But that's exactly what happened. After handing over the necklace and the past to Lacey, my days grew quieter, yes, but not emptier. They grew fuller in a different way. There was a calmness to my mornings, a peace that came with knowing the circle was complete, that I'd held the weight of a legacy long enough, and now it was being carried with care. I still saw Lacey and Ruby every week. Sometimes they'd visit me. Other times, I'd ride the bus into town, a small brown paper bag of banana muffins in my hand. Ruby would greet me with outstretched arms and sticky fingers. Lacey would offer coffee, and we would sit together in a silence that no longer hurt, a silence that felt like music too soft to need words. One afternoon, Lacey pulled out the legacy journal, the one we'd started together. It was thicker now. The pages rippled with ink and smudges and pressed leaves. On the final page, in Ruby's shaky toddler handwriting, was a scrawl of crayon lines beneath her name, written with help. "Ruby March, She wanted to write her name next to ours, Lacey said with a smile. She doesn't even know the story yet, but she wants to be in it. And that's when I really knew, that this necklace had never been about weddings or traditions or even sacrifice. It had always been about belonging, about being seen, about saying you are part of something older, deeper, wiser than you'll ever fully understand. And that's okay. That night, I sat in my favorite chair with my mother's quilt pulled over my legs. The stars shimmered through the open curtains. I thought of all the women who came before me, women who were never famous, never rich, never noticed in the ways the world often measures value. But they were architects of love, weavers of silence, curators of strength, and I had joined them. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. She remembers now, and that's enough, because we spend so much of our lives trying to prove that we mattered, trying to leave something behind. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can leave is a story. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can wear is someone else's hope. That necklace, now resting in a different drawer in a different house, will one day be worn again by Ruby, or Ruby's daughter, or perhaps someone not yet born, someone who hasn't yet heard the story, but already carries its weight in her bones. She'll fasten the clasp at her neck, and she'll stand a little taller. And maybe she'll look into the mirror and say, I don't just look like them. I remember them. And that will be enough. It will always be enough. If you've listened this far, thank you. You've just walked alongside a woman who was once forgotten, once underestimated, once silenced, but she never disappeared. She waited. And in her waiting, she built bridges out of memory, ladders out of forgiveness, and walls not to keep others out, but to remind them what home felt like. Because not every story of betrayal ends in rage. Sometimes it ends in legacy, quiet, steady, unshakable. Let this story be a reminder. The most valuable heirlooms aren't made of gold. They're made of love, pressed down over time, layered through generations, tested by shame, and carried forward by choice. We are not just our titles, our appearances, or our mistakes. We are what we choose to remember and who we choose to forgive. So the next time someone calls you too much or not enough, remember this necklace. And remember Miriam Blake. She didn't crash a wedding. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight to be seen. She simply kept what was hers. And in doing so, she passed down what can never be stolen. A name, a story, a truth. Thank you for listening to Grace's Truth. If this story moved, you share it. And if it reminded you of someone, call them. Because love doesn't live in grand gestures. It lives in the quiet decision to stay connected. Even when the invitation never comes,